Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and respected professional from the world of academia from UK, Professor Alex Edmans. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Professor Edmans is the Professor of Finance at London Business School. He's an author of a book titled May Contain Lies, How Our Biases Cause Us to Fall for Misinformation and How to Combat It. He's also the author of another book, Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit. Alex was also the former managing editor of the Review of Finance, which is one of the leading academic finance journals in Europe. So, Alex, before we talk about your book, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey and the fact that you've had diverse careers spanning academia and investment banking. How have these influenced your work?
Well, thanks very much for that question. Actually, I might go back even further back than investment banking to what I studied at school. So in the UK, you do A levels, which means that you specialize very early. And often people will do just sciences, so maths, physics, chemistry, or just art, such as English, history, and German. But I did a mix of the two. I did both arts and sciences. I studied both economics and English, but also German and maths. And so that was a mix. And that's why I went into social sciences. I did economics at university. So what this means is that there are some theories, so it's not completely subjective, but also those theories are not set in stone, unlike physics. So it might mean that you and I both see the same data, and I believe taxes should be higher, and you believe taxes should be lower, and we can have a difference of viewpoints even though we see the same data, and I find that really interesting. And that's why I went into an economics finance career such as investment banking. So that's something where, again, you might have two people who have an opinion as to what a company's strategy should be, and you might disagree, and you learn from hearing the other person's opinion. And then I went into academia, so I wanted to look at rigorous research in order to explore these issues more deeply. So investment banking is a great career, but you focus on studying one company's problems at one time. Whereas with investment banking, whereas with academia, sorry, if you were to deliver a result, a paper, that is something that could be widespread. It's more broad than just one specific company.
Great response. Thank you. So let's now talk about your book, May Contain Lies, How Our Biases Cause Us to Fall for Misinformation and How to Combat It. My first question to you, Alex, is what inspired you to write May Contain Lies, and how does it reflect your own experiences and research in behavioral finance?
Yeah, it's because there's lots of misinformation out there. So it used to be in the past, we knew what the sources of information were, and we would go to those sources. So it might be an encyclopedia if we wanted to learn about something. But nowadays, there's misinformation from all different sources because anybody can produce information. You can just go and spread a conspiracy theory on a social media platform. And if people like it because of what it says, then they'll spread it more widely. Nowadays, who produces research? It's not just academic scholars, but it's also companies. And these companies might be doing research in order to boost their brand image. It's for marketing. And so that research is just research which finds what people want to hear. And so this is the important link to behavioral finance that you mentioned. So you're right that I work in this topic as well. And what this suggests is that we will make mistakes. So even though in the cold light of day, we know things like correlation is not causation. When there are biases, this causes us to leave our knowledge at the door and forget about it. And instead, we interpret information based on whether we like it. And so, what I want to do is highlight the biases that cause us to fall for misinformation and also discuss how to combat it.
Fascinating. Thank you. Can you also, for my viewers and listeners, explain the concept of confirmation bias? And why is it so pervasive in our interpretation of information?
Absolutely. So this is what I believe to be the key bias in affecting how we respond to information. So confirmation bias is the idea that we have a view of the world, and then we will accept uncritically any study or piece of information that supports that worldview. And in contrast, if there's a study that contradicts our worldview, we will respond to this negatively and either not read it to begin with, or when we read it with a mindset to pick it apart. So this is serious. This is a problem because what it means is that we respond to information based on its appeal and not its accuracy.
Interesting. And your book, Alex, also outlines a term which is called the ladder of misinference. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, and how does this the concept and the implications impact how we process information?
Certainly. So my book is about misinformation. And you might think, well, that's not that new. Aren't there other books about misinformation out there? And there are. And I think they're good. I'm not going to talk negatively about them.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges is that these books are so comprehensive that they highlight, let's say, 139 ways in which you can fall for misinformation. And it's very hard for the reader to remember all of these and put them into practice. So what I wanted to do was to classify misinformation into 4 different types. And so this is what I call the ladder of misinference. Why I have the picture of a ladder is that when you see some information and then you draw conclusions, you're climbing up the ladder, you're making inferences from this. But I call this the ladder of misinference. It's a play on words on the common ladder of inference, is that we make mistakes. So the first step of the ladder is that a statement is not fact. It may not be accurate. So what do I mean by this is sometimes you can just get misquoted. So I have been testifying, for example, in the UK Parliament, and sometimes the final parliamentary report would quote me in completely the opposite direction from my original testimony. So they make a statement, they'll put a footnote. You look at the footnote and it says Professor Alex Edmans. So anybody reading it might think, this is something which was given by a professor who studied this field.
Correct.
But actually, they might misquote me in the opposite direction. And people who are not willing to go up and look up the reference, and so they might just accept it and move on. So that's the most basic level of misinformation, which is just fact checking. But the other 3 steps of the ladder highlight that it's more than just checking the facts. So the second step is that a fact is not data. It may not be representative. So what do I mean by this? Even if something is 100% accurate, it may well be a hand-picked example. So take the idea that starting with why leads to success. So there's a book by Simon Sinek which claims this, which has sold millions of copies. And he says, well, Apple started with why, and Apple's really successful. But that is just one hand-picked anecdote. There could be hundreds of other companies that started with why and failed, so you can't just look at the exceptions. The third misstep is that data is not evidence. It may not be conclusive. So you might think the solution to one hand-picked example is to look at hundreds of data points. But it could be that there's correlation but no causation. So one of the fields I work in is sustainability, and people highlight how sustainable companies perform better. But is it sustainability causes better performance, or is it better performance allows a company to invest more in sustainability? The final misstep is that evidence is not proof. It may not be universal. So even if you have comprehensive causation in one particular setting, it might only apply in that setting and not others. So Malcolm Gladwell claims there's a 10,000 hours rule, that if you practice for 10,000 hours, you'll be successful. But that was evidence that he quotes, which studied violinists. He claims this rule applies to all settings, including chess and neurosurgery. Those are very different settings from violin playing. So even if the original study nailed the result in violin playing, it need not extend to those other settings.
Amazing. Thank you. My next question for you is, how does the black and white thinking contribute to societal divisions, and what steps can individuals take to overcome this?
So black and white thinking is the idea that you see something as being always good or always bad. There's no room for shades of grey. There's no room for nuance. And this contributes to societal divisions because it means that people think there's only one possible viewpoint, and anybody who disagrees with that viewpoint is completely wrong. For example, 8 years ago, there was the referendum for whether the UK should leave the European Union. And I was someone who was strongly in favour of remaining. But there were many people who were so strong that they thought that anybody who thought of Brexit must be racist or xenophobic or uninformed. And so this may well indeed be why the Remain campaign was unsuccessful, is that they didn't bother to try to figure out why people wanted to leave the European Union. They thought, well, they were just uninformed. They didn't bother to figure out, well, what was behind some of those concerns. Nowadays, you might see sustainability being a topic where there's black and white thinking. People believe that sustainability is so important that companies should pursue it, when there's actually legitimate arguments for why actually sometimes sustainability can be at the expense of a company's long-term profitability. But if you have this black and white view, then you think sustainability is always good and you never see the possibility of any trade-offs.
Amazing. Thank you. My next question is, how do you think the digital age and social media have exacerbated the problems of misinterpretation and misinformation?
I think this significantly leads to problems because it means that you can get information from unreliable sources. Again, going back to my example at the start, it used to be you had to trek down to the library, you had to get out a encyclopedia or a textbook. That's where we get information from. But nowadays, we get information which has been forwarded by somebody else. It might be originally from a internet celebrity or just a person on the street who's making a particular point, and that point goes viral. Or it might be that the point was taken legitimately from a very good data source, but then it's misquoted, just like I was misquoted when giving testimony in the UK Parliament. So what this means is that we're often not going to original sources, trusted sources of information. We're either going to untrustworthy sources or trusted sources, but going over somebody's paraphrase.
Well said. My next question is, given the evolving nature of misinformation, especially with deepfakes and AI, what future challenges do you envisage in the fight against misinformation?
Well, I think with AI, there is additional challenges, is that can be, particularly for generative AI, an additional way of producing misinformation. And it could be, if people are particularly clever, they can get AI to generate something in the style of a famous author or policymaker or scientist. And then people might just pass this off as being correct because they don't know that it was actually AI generated.
Well said. Two more questions relating to your book. My next one is, in creating societies that think smarter, what role do policymakers and educators have to play?
I think they have a large role because how do we promote critical thinking? This starts with schools. So what I highlight in one of the final chapters of the book, The Way Forward, is the importance of statistical literacy. Now, you might think, well, that's something challenging to teach because don't we learn statistics at age 16? We can't teach this from age 5. But what I'm trying to highlight is statistical literacy is something which is really simple. It's just about there being multiple explanations for a piece of data. So already, if you're a young kid, you read a murder mystery, often it's not the most likely suspect who is actually the person who committed the murder. And similarly, statistical literacy means let's not take the most simple explanation of the data. And we teach kids to be things we're teaching children. So I don't think it's unreasonable to teach basic statistical literacy. My book has not a single equation in it. Statistical literacy is not about understanding complicated equations. It's instead about exercising discernment and judgment.
Very interesting. And my last question for you, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation, what is the one key message you want readers to take away from your book?
It's to question everything. So often we just accept things at face value. We bandy around these phrases like research shows that, studies find that, evidence proves that, but studies can show anything that they want to show. So question the actual methodology, question, is it actually correlation or causation, question whether it's just a couple of hand-picked examples or whether it's something which is true in general.
That's it. So I'm going to now move to your other avatar as the professor of finance at London Business School. I've got a few questions for you relating to this. What, in your view, is the most common misconception about finance that you encounter, and how do you address this?
I think it's the people think finance is evil. It's about short-termism. It's about exploitation and extraction of value at the
Okay.
expense of wider society.
Mm,
And I think this is incorrect because what this assumes is what I call the pie splitting mentality. That
mm,
assumes the value that a company creates is a fixed pie. So anything that goes to shareholders in the form of profits is
mm,
at the expense of wider society. But
mm,
as I highlighted in my first book called Grow the Pie,
mhm,
actually the pie can be grown. So how do companies become really profitable? How is it that Apple was the first company to be worth $1 trillion? It's not through extracting value, but creating value by making great products like iPhones. Our lives would be completely different if
mm,
we didn't have our smartphones with us. So
mm,
actually companies create profits in the long term as a result of creating value for society rather than as a result of exploitation.
Well said. And how would you approach the challenge of teaching finance in a way that's accessible and engaging to a wide audience?
Well, what I try to do is to break these concepts down into as simple language as possible.
Mm,
Notice that this is not dumbing things down. So, my course at LBS, I teach the core finance class, which is taken by all students. Some of them have no finance background at all. But
mm,
what I try to do is just to break this down into bite sized chunks. I might often use analogies from outside finance. So, these might be analogies from, say, sports, just to make this very clear. But I think is an important challenge to make sure that you make the concept simple, but without oversimplifying it. Because
mm,
if you actually oversimplifying it and teach a dumbed down version of finance, then you're not doing anybody a service. And so recently, I became the co-author of the textbook Principles of Corporate Finance by Brealey, Myers, Allen, and now Edmans. And
mm,
this is a book that I learned from as an undergraduate at Oxford. Then we were all given copies at Morgan Stanley. And then when I was a professor at Wharton, I taught this book. So it's now a pleasure to be a co-author on this. And
mm,
this is certainly one thing I'm trying to do with the textbook is to make it as simple and intuitive as possible to move away from complicated algebra, but also without dumbing it down and being faithful to the principles of finance.
Fascinating. And when I finished business school in 1979, I was also a finance major. But one of the things that I was often addressed to me was finance and accounting is the same. And we don't want to be, sitting and doing trial balances and annual reports. I'd love to get your perspective on how is finance and accounting different.
Well, they are different, but they're also related. So finance, so accounting is recording things on the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. Accounting is typically backward looking. So
Mm,
you just report what is there, what the company has done. Finance is more forward looking.
yeah.
So what you're trying to do is to evaluate potential investments. You always want to forecast future cash flows, look at the future cost of capital. So I think they are complementary. They're both useful to understand the business, but they're also quite different. Accounting is what you can record. Finance often looks at intangible things and future expectations.
Well said. So I have time for two more questions now. My next question is, could you discuss the importance of data and evidence in decision making, especially in today's fast-paced information environment?
Yes, well, data and evidence is just something which you use to guide you. It's
Mm,
something that you use to make better decisions. So whenever you want to make a decision in a complex environment, you want to make sure you have as much information as possible. But there is obviously the danger that sometimes this information is inaccurate, or you're interpreting the information incorrectly. And so that's one of the reasons for writing my book, May Contain Lies, is to
mm.
guide people on how they should use information.
And on that note, Alex, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, May Contain Lies. And thank you also for speaking to me about so many different aspects of finance and accounting. Thank you
Okay,
again and good luck.
great. Thanks very much, Ash.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.